welcome to another installment of the We Are Change talk show. I thank you for joining me. Now, 9/11 was a turning point in many people's lives. It led to a mass awakening, with people doing investigative research, questioning the official narrative. So I'm delighted to introduce another world-class guest, Richard Gage, from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Let's cross over to that interview now. It's a privilege to welcome to the show architect Richard Gage. You have an impeccable history exposing the real truth behind 9/11. It's a privilege to have you on the show. How are you going there today?
Thank you, Jeff. Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. So please enlighten the viewers a little bit about your background, how you came into this space and got involved with this 9/11 issue, please.
Yes. Well, I'm a 30-year architect, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I'm also the former CEO of that organization. I'm on my own now with Richard Gage 9/11 at richardgage911.org, our new website. So I'm excited to share with your viewers today, Jeff, the evidence for the explosive demolition of all three World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. It was back in 2006 when I heard on the radio David Ray Griffin, who has written now 14 books on the subject of the destruction of these towers and the other events surrounding the attacks of 9/11. So I was really moved to do something because these are buildings and I am an architect. And for some reason, there was no other architects organized to talk about the evidence that we're going to talk about tonight. And so I'm raring to go.
Excellent. And this was a critical time in so many people's lives. It led to their awakening, myself included, and several of my family members. When this happened, it led people to really investigate what was going on. There's so many different anomalies that we'll be discussing. Building 7, it appears to have just came down without any planes impacting. We can go into so much. Jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams. I mean, there's so much to get into here, and it is crucial for people with professions like yourself to come in and give your expertise on the situation. It adds so much credibility to the movement, doesn't it?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I hope so. It's important to have the technical experts speaking out on this subject. There are not that many who do or who will. We've assembled 3,500 architects and engineers, though, on the petition demanding a new investigation. And so that's 30,000 years of technical credibility. So we hope that brings something to the table as well. I focus on Building 7 because Building 7 is the World Trade Center Building 7. It's the third tower that collapsed on 9/11, and most people know nothing about it. Most architects and engineers, in fact, are completely unaware of the third worst structural failure in modern history. This is a 47-story skyscraper that in the afternoon of 9/11 at 5:20, after witnesses hear explosions, it drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint. And this at free fall acceleration, as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. So this does not happen by fires. In fact, fires much larger, longer lasting, and hotter fires in skyscrapers have never brought down a single skyscraper in American history. So it's absolutely should have been the most studied failure of all of them. Remember, it wasn't hit by a plane. We bring this to the attention to people first because most of them don't know anything about it. They haven't formed preconceived opinions like they have at the Twin Towers, having been through so much propaganda from the media and our government about the towers and how they came down. When people see this building, they're just in shock, like I was in 2006. I was on my way back from a construction observation meeting, and I listened to David Ray Griffin on the radio with Bonnie Faulkner's Guns and Butter program, and he was talking about how this third tower dropped. And I go, "What are you talking about? I'm an architect. I would know if there was a third tower that dropped at the World Trade Center." And I had to go find out if this was all true. So I went the next day and heard him talking at the Oakland Grand Lake Theater. And sure enough, there was, well, I had to watch it on a live stream because there were 600 people packed into that audience for him. It was an incredible event for the San Francisco and Oakland 9/11 Truth Movement. They wouldn't let me in. I got there a little bit late, and it was just packed. So when I did get home, I did see this building drop, and I was in shock. Yeah, that looks like a controlled demolition, just like the old hotels in Las Vegas, in fact. And witnesses are hearing explosions. Now, all of this evidence is available for your viewers at our website. Well, not right now, because my YouTube channel just got taken down for the third time.
Oh, dreadful.
Believe it or not, that's for hate speech. Do I sound like a hateful person?
Not at all.
I don't even blame the people who did this. I just talk about the evidence. But nevertheless, YouTube calls it hate speech. They've taken down our station. Anyway, I hate to recommend YouTube to people, but on YouTube, you can watch the collapse of Building 7. Just put WTC 7 collapse, and you'll see it coming down right before your eyes, just like I did in May of 2006. So yeah, that was a shocker. And then you go into the evidence of the aftermath of Building 7, and you find that there's images that were taken from airplanes of the thermal signature. They find 1400 degree temperatures on the surface of the pile of Building 7. Well, wait a minute. That's hotter than most office fires ever get. And so we have how do we get temperatures on the surface without fires? Well, there's something much hotter, deeper down in the pile, radiating up, that's cooling off to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. By the time it's about half of that, 700 degrees Celsius. What could create those kinds of incredible temperatures down in the pile? Well, the first responders are seeing pools of molten iron. They call it molten steel. It turns out to be molten iron, which we'll discuss in a minute. And they talk about lava, like lava flowing down the channel rails, like from a volcano. That's what they're seeing. They've never seen this in a fire before. They're freaked out. All these witnesses are on our landmark documentary called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. And that is also on YouTube. So that is just like, that's freaking them out. But we also have the evidence in all the dust throughout World Trade Center, the complex, that the U.S. Geological Survey has identified and they find about 6% of these samples are composed of what? Previously molten iron microspheres. Well, that's incredible. They find billions of these things. They don't know where they came from. They document them very well. This is molten iron. So where does molten iron come from? Well, molten iron is the byproduct of thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So you have molten iron in the form of these spheres. Well, a molten iron is issued at 4,000 degrees in thermite. That's where all the heat could come from. That's the only explanation of where the heat could come from. There is no other rational explanation in the official narrative as to where this heat could come from. And that's what the first responders saw. They saw the heat flowing like lava. And again, it turns out to be molten iron, which is what the USGS finds. R.J. Lee also finds this in their studies of the dust. They're an environmental consulting firm who did studies. So they find that these molten iron microspheres are formed during the event, not before, by the iron workers who put the welders who put the building together in the late 60s.
That's crucial information for the viewers right there, looking at the melting point of steel, and that was not natural what was taking place. The thermite, very important. And if you look at Building 7, the tenants, it appears like there was records being kept there that they were trying to erase, and that was a leading factor and what contributed as well. Now, yes, a free fall demolition into its own footprint. Even explosive technicians have even weighed in on this subject, and they concur that this is exactly what was happening. And they even went as far as to broadcast the fact that buildings were taken down before it even happened. So there's many red flags here, isn't there?
Yep, a whole mess of them. And so, this detailed chemical analysis of what's in the dust by the USGS and R.J. Lee, who says they're not formed afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart either. So this is direct evidence of thermite incendiaries. It can't be anything else. So we have the forensic evidence. In fact, what they found also, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrod in Copenhagen, is they find the red-gray chips, which they're very curious because they're attracted by a magnet. So they have an extremely high iron content. So it's not paint. So they get real curious, and they do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, and they find what? They find the ingredients of thermite in what they thought at first was paint. So this is incredible. It's a 1/16 of an inch large on average, and just tiny little flakes. But they're in all the dust samples that they collected. So they put them in a differential scanning calorimeter, a heater, and they ignite at 420 degrees Celsius. And what happens when they ignite? They produce what? They produce molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust by the U.S. Geological Survey and R.J. Lee consulting firm. So we know exactly where these molten iron microspheres came from. 6% of the dust samples, up to 4 tons by extrapolation altogether throughout all the World Trade Center dust. They could only have come from these red-gray chips. The red-gray chips are proven to be nanothermite. Because they produce a whole lot more energy when they ignite. And That's active thermitic materials. That's why the paper is called, the peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal is called Active Thermitic Materials in the World Trade Center Dust. So all of this packages together quite neatly to in a set of repeatable experimental data that's self-corroborating and could put a lot of people away for mass murder and treason, to say the least. This is damning evidence, which we've given submitted in a grand jury petition to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan a couple of years ago, and we have now sued the U.S. Attorney to make sure that he impanels a special grand jury. And that lawsuit has been elevated to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and they're about to weigh in on it imminently. So that's very exciting to get some court action. If it doesn't work there, we'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court. And this is through the assistance of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and specifically their litigation director, Mick Harrison. So we're making a film also with all of this evidence that we're talking about today, and presenting it to the grand jury and to the public as if they were grand jurors. And Mick will present the evidence and what it means legally, what their options are legally, who they might call for to subpoena witnesses and persons of special interest. So all of that is coming up. It's a big summer.
You are doing absolutely brilliant work, and this is going to help bring closure to some of the families of the victims. So many lives lost. And during the official investigation, there was major cover-ups that prevented a lot of the truth from getting out, wasn't there?
Yes, a cover-up of the crime is a crime in and of itself, and many people are prosecuted for the cover-up, and NIST is an essential part of that. They're the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses, all three of them, to the American people. And what they have engaged in is complete fraud, scientific fraud, and of course the overseeing the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene as well, because that was all allowed to go to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it to perform a real investigation. The NIST cover-up of the Building 7 event in their final report, which came out 7 years later in 2008, everybody who was interested in that collapse at one time probably completely forgot about it, if they ever knew about it, when NIST finally issued their report. In it, they fault fires on floor 13 and 12, and they said these fires were fully engulfing, the building, and they're few, they're small, and they're scattered, and fires have never brought down a steel frame, fire-protected high-rise building ever. And so here's the first example of such. So it should be an unimpeachable and an extremely detailed investigation overseen by many, many experts and peer-reviewed and discussed in every university in fire science and structural engineering in the country. But most all of them know nothing about it. We go to conferences, we present the evidence. They're shocked that there was a third tower to come down. They're just like saying, okay, well, where do I sign up? I agree, we need a real investigation of this. That's not a destruction or collapse by fire. It looks like a controlled demolition,
Yeah.
They know, it's very intuitive. But then the evidence backs that up. So, backtracking, Building 7. I forgot what your question was.
You're doing very crucial work. And one thing that stood out to me through this whole investigation was that many architects said these buildings were designed to withstand impacts from planes and fires. So the fact that they were brought down was very alarming, wasn't it?
Well, let's go to the Twin Towers then, because
Yeah.
the official narrative tells us that once again, these fires were consuming the building. Well, if you look at the time of the collapse, the fires were virtually out in both of the buildings. And we have the NIST is saying that the upper part of the building, above the point of jet plane impacts, after weakening of steel by the fire, drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. Well, this is completely violating the law of conservation of energy. I mean, there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Like, say, a Mack truck runs into a Volkswagen, and what's going to win? The Mack truck, the bigger, stronger structure. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. It's the same set of equal and opposite destructive forces. The lightest part of the structure, which is the top of a skyscraper, cannot possibly destroy the heavier, cold, hard, intact steel, which gets heavier and heavier until it's almost solid steel at the base, each column 52 inches by 30 inches, I think. And then at the top, it's only like 3/8 inch thick steel I-beams. So you have an impossible scenario set off right away, 2 days after 9/11. This mathematical genius structural engineer, Zdeněk Besant of Chicago Northwestern University, is working away in his den while the rest of us are trying to figure out what just happened to us, America under attack. Mm-hmm. And he's sitting there calculating, and what does he come up with? The theoretical basis for NIST's theory, column failure theory, which says that the floors sagged due to the fires up there because the fireproofing had been knocked off by the planes. That pulled in the perimeter columns. That caused the upper part to then, with its force, cause a progressive collapse all the way down to the bottom. Well, none of that is true. It's every step of it, just like Building 7, initiation of collapse. Every step of it is falsified. It's a complete abuse of science by NIST in each case. In the case of Building 7, omitting key structural components, exaggerating the calculations, falsifying them. Well, that's exactly what Zdeněk Besant did over with the Twin Towers when he made the top part three times as heavy as it was. I made the bottom part a third of its strength, omitted key reserve strength capacities of the columns below, and took out a complete story of columns at about the point of jet plane impacts so that the upper part could start with a complete free fall so that it would impact in a dynamic load the floors below without any columns slowing it down whatsoever. So it's complete fraud from beginning to end, and we've been calling them out on this in many different ways, including ethics violations, a refusal to publish the papers submitted to the American Society of Civil Engineers by Tony Zambotti, Richard Johns, and Gregory Zudolinski. And they still refused. They said it was out of scope to publish this paper. Well, how can it be out of scope to publish a paper that is challenging the very basis of the paper that was previously published by the same journal? So these are the kind of things that we run up against. So it's kind of fruitless in the academic environment because we have uh, architects and engineers who just want to get on with their life. They don't seem to want to challenge the status quo and put their own reputations at risk, because we get called conspiracy theorists for doing such things. And I've gotten used to that. But everybody who comes to our presentations around the country and around the world in 24 countries and 100 American cities, everybody who arrives, we ask, how many of you pretty much believe the official story? How many of you are unsure? How many of you have already done some analysis and found out that these buildings came down by controlled demolition? Well, we convert of those who haven't already come in with a preset bias toward controlled demolition. We convert almost all of them. Often it's 100%. So the evidence itself, it does speak for itself. The evidence of the explosive nature of the towers. For instance, during the collapse, 4-ton and 8-ton structural steel sections ejected laterally out of the towers at 80 miles an hour, landing 600 feet in every direction, trailing thick white smoke clouds. Why are structural steel members trailing thick white smoke clouds? Office fires don't light steel on fire. So this is yet another direct proof of controlled demolition in the case of, well, with incendiaries. The ends of the steel beams, the columns have this evidence that they can't shake. So we have evidence of incendiaries, evidence of extreme explosiveness. We have explosions going off
Yes.
floor by floor.
That's an excellent
You can-
description
if
of
you
what
just
took
zoom in
place.
some of
And
these cameras.
with you, Steph, your expert analysis on what took place, it gives other architects and engineers courage to speak out as well, because, as you said, some are reluctant because they don't want to jeopardize their career by questioning the status quo. But when more people show bravery, they show morals and principles, and do it in a wonderfully professional way, such as yourself. This is absolutely groundbreaking work. And you mentioned it's a massive fraud, even an insurance fraud as well, with Larry Silverstein taking out an insurance policy right beforehand. That right there is criminal in itself, isn't it? It looks very suspicious.
Yeah, Larry Silverstein had the opportunity to bid on the purchase of the World Trade Center. All the buildings were up for sale the year before 9/11. And interesting, switching from public hands to private hands. I guess he won, even though he didn't have the highest bid. But he won, and he put massive terrorist insurance on both towers. It's incredible. Now, he leveraged just 15 million of his own money to 125 million, then leveraged that to 3.2 billion, the purchase price. So he didn't have much skin in the game at all. And what happened was that this deal went through just 6 weeks prior to 9/11. Now, these buildings were white elephants. They needed 10 to 15 billion. 10 to 15 billion to take. That's a lot more than he bought it for. To take out the asbestos, which the New York court, the New York City was requiring the Port Authority to do according to federal law. You can't leave the asbestos in the buildings. So that was an incredible, I think that was 5 billion alone. Unreasonable, right? Given a $3.2 billion purchase price. Then he also had, the buildings required major electrical, communications, and mechanical upgrades, because the city, the other buildings in the city that were built in the 80s and the 90s were much more modernized, and their views were unsurpassed. In the Twin Towers, you had a column marching every meter around the perimeter of the building. It was more like a jail cell. So a lot of researchers have pointed out that these buildings were only half occupied at the time of the purchase by Silverstein. Well, why would he purchase half occupied buildings that needed massive upgrades unless he knew his asbestos abatement was about to come?
Yeah, that explains it very well. And I strongly urge everyone to do their research on that. And the official narrative that they pushed out to the public, it's insulting to the people's intelligence, even claiming to have found passports in the rubble. I mean, that's outrageous to push that forward and expect people to believe it, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of paper down below, so I wouldn't expect everything to be burned, but it is curious how the FBI is just walking around and finds at least one passport. I don't know if they find them all or what, but yeah, almost every part of the official story stinks to high heaven.
It most certainly does. And witness testimonies, they all claim to have heard explosions one after another.
Well, let's talk about them.
Yeah.
This is extremely important. Professor Graham McQueen in Toronto actually read 12,000 pages of oral testimonies that were transcripts. And these were the first responders who were recorded orally by their departments because this was commissioned by the fire commissioner, Thomas von Eschen. He said before their memories became reshaped by a collective memory, which is kind of what happened as a result of the media propaganda since. But what's in these testimonies? Well, Professor Graham McQueen found that 118 of these first responders were talking about hearing explosions, seeing explosions, experiencing explosions, being blown around the building by explosions. This is incredible. That number has now risen to 156 first responders. But explosions are not a part of the official story. And by the way, most of these were before the towers came down. In fact, there were 40 reporters, unique reporters from, let's say, different stations that would show up before the mainstream narrative took over the next day. These reporters were almost exclusively, almost all of them, reporting on an explosion-based event. 22 of them were eyewitnesses to explosions and experienced debris being blown on them of explosions before the towers came down. The FBI themselves says their working theory is explosions bringing the towers down. The New York Police Department, similar, and the FDNY, with all of the evidence of explosions in the testimony by their own members of explosions. This is just damning testimony. All of it was taken out of the final report. Well, it wasn't ever in the final report or any report, but this is a complete abuse of science and the scientific method, eliminating categories, whole categories of evidence that actually explains what we are all looking at that morning in the destruction of these two towers by the extreme explosiveness of the towers themselves and then turning it around and calling it a progressive collapse due to structural weakening by fire.
And it's an obvious false flag attack similar to Gulf of Tonkin. It was done as a pretext to invade Iraq, wasn't it?
Well, false flag events are those that governments use in order to manipulate their population emotionally to support an otherwise unpopular war. And these have been used, as you mentioned, in Vietnam with the attack on the Pueblo, which in the Gulf of Tonkin, which never happened. They've been used to start World War I, World War II, the sinking of the Maine, the Spanish-American War. There are numerous precedents for this. In fact, the Northwoods Project is one in which the Joint Chiefs of Staff brought to Kennedy a plan hatched to send an airplane ostensibly full of college students to Havana, but it gets shot down by Havana. Well, the plan was for our own forces to shoot it down and blame it on Castro and to precipitate an invasion. There's always an event that occurs as a result of these false flag events that's much more severe than the event itself. We lost 3,000, which is extremely severe in the case of the Twin Towers, and more at the Pentagon and more in Shanksville. But this precipitated an invasion of two countries in the Middle East in which 2 million were killed, and many soldiers, including, I think it's 7,000, and then over 1,000 every year take their own lives just because of the incredible stress they were under on duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then we have the enactment of the Patriot Act,
Yes.
the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which decimated so many of our civil liberties. In other words, our emails, our phone calls are being recorded illegally, unconstitutionally, but they've declared this an emergency.
Well, Richard, you are doing a phenomenal job bringing the truth to the surface on what took place at 9/11, also bringing closure to some of the families that have lost loved ones here. You should feel very proud of yourself. Continued success with everything you're doing, and let's hope we can get some justice. That does it for today's show. Anybody that would like to show their financial support in relation to my legal case, information will be in the description for those that would like to provide assistance, as well as all of the details where Richard Gage and his fabulous work can be found. But until next time, be sure to like, share and subscribe.